From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf, and it's a world gone mad. Episode 245. It's Wednesday. Time for some weirdness. Here we go. Political earthquake rocks New York's Democratic primaries. Last night's Democratic primaries in New York were the political equivalent of a smoke alarm going off inside Democratic Party headquarters. Candidates backed by Zohran Mamdani scored major victories. And suddenly the people who are always telling everyone else how politics works are discovering the voters didn't bother reading the script. That's got to be awkward. Imagine spending millions of dollars on consultants, polling strategy sessions, donor meetings, and endorsements only to discover voters brought their own ideas to the election. The Democratic establishment has spent years acting like it owns the franchise. The voters get to buy a ticket, maybe some popcorn, sit quietly, and watch the show. Last night, voters walked into the projection booth, started changing the movie. That's what has party insiders rattled. Not that Mamdani-backed candidates won. It's that they won despite all the people who are supposed to know better. Now, I love political consultants. It's the only profession where you can be wrong repeatedly and still be treated like a genius. Every election, they're shocked by something. They're shocked when voters are angry. They're shocked when voters want change. They're shocked when voters reject establishment candidates. At this point, if a consultant told me the sun was coming up tomorrow, I'd probably open the curtains just to double check. Meanwhile, Democratic insiders keep using the word electability like it's some kind of magical spell. Electability, electability, electability. Say it 3 times, and apparently rent drops by $1,000 and groceries become affordable again. Americans are getting squeezed from every direction, but the solution from the political class is always another lecture about strategy. People aren't worried about strategy. They're worried about whether they can afford to stay in their apartment another year. That's why Mamdani's influence matters. Not because of one race. Not because of one endorsement. Because movements are starting to beat machines. Energy is starting to beat hierarchy. Volunteers are starting to beat insiders. That's what keeps political professionals awake at night. You can control a donor list. You can control a campaign budget. It's a lot harder to control thousands of motivated voters who've decided they're tired of waiting their turn. Republicans are watching this, practically sending thank you cards. Progressives are celebrating like they just won the lottery. Democratic leaders are staring at the same results and wondering whether they're looking at the future of the party or the beginning of a civil war. That's not exactly a sign of confidence. Now, the real lesson from last night is simple. Democratic voters looked at the establishment, looked at the approved candidates, looked at the experts, looked at the consultants, and basically said, "Thank you for your recommendation. We'll take it from here." And for a lot of people who are used to giving orders instead of receiving them, that had to be a very long night. Congress finally managed to accomplish something most Americans assumed was impossible. Republicans and Democrats actually agreed on a housing affordability bill. There's that word again. In today's Washington, that's like discovering a panda riding a unicorn through a solar eclipse. It doesn't happen. Yet somehow lawmakers got together, produced legislation aimed at one of the biggest problems facing the country. Then Donald Trump stepped in and said he wouldn't sign the bill unless Congress first passed his voting bill, because apparently housing and voting are now roommates. That's the part that would confuse normal people. Housing is one issue, voting is another issue. They're not cousins, they're not neighbors, they're not even in the same zip code. Yet Donald Trump has decided the housing bill, affordability, doesn't move unless his voting bill moves first. It's the legislative version of walking into a car dealership, being told you can't buy the car unless you also agree to purchase a refrigerator. These are completely different conversations, but Donald Trump is insisting they become one. The housing crisis is already ridiculous enough. People can't afford homes. People can't afford rent. Young adults are discovering that moving out now requires the financial resources once associated with invading a small country. Entire generations were told to work hard, save money, someday buy a house. Now someday appears to be scheduled for some time after the heat death of the universe. And here's what amazes me. Donald Trump keeps saying he understands the struggles facing ordinary Americans. Well, here's a bill aimed at housing affordability, Donnie, that Republicans and Democrats actually agreed on, not theoretically, not someday, not right after another committee hearing, right now. Yet, Donald Trump is holding it up because he wants leverage on an entirely different issue. Americans are struggling with housing costs, and Donald Trump's response is essentially, we'll get to that after I get what I want on voting. That's the addiction. Donald Trump doesn't simply see a housing bill. Donald Trump sees leverage. The housing bill becomes leverage. The voting bill becomes leverage. Everything in Donald Trump's mind becomes leverage. A bipartisan housing bill that already passed becomes a bargaining chip. One of the few areas where Congress actually found agreement becomes another political power play by Trump. Meanwhile, regular people are sitting at home wondering whether anyone in Washington has noticed rent is due every month. They don't care about legislative chess. They don't care about procedural brinkmanship. They don't care which politician won the week's power struggle. They care whether housing gets cheaper. The larger lesson here is that Trump is willing to block a bipartisan housing affordability bill unless Congress gives him something completely unrelated first. The country has a housing problem. Congress actually produced a housing bill. Republicans and Democrats found common ground. And Trump is the one standing in front of it and saying, no. If there were ever a perfect example of why Americans get frustrated with politics, this might be it. The government finally stumbled onto a possible solution of housing, and Donald Trump decided the solution could wait until he wins a different fight. And the Senate just did something that has become surprisingly rare in Washington. It told Donald Trump no on something. Not maybe, not later, not after a committee study. No. A bipartisan majority voted to limit Trump's ability to take military action against Iran without congressional approval. Oh, that's right. Remember the congressional approval stuff that Trump is bypassing? And the political significance goes far beyond Iran. For years, we've heard that Republican lawmakers march in lockstep behind Donald Trump. That's been the storyline. Trump wants something, Republicans salute. Trump changes his mind, Republicans salute again. Trump walks into a wall, Republicans issue a statement praising the wall. That's been the perception. Then this vote happened. What makes this fascinating is that war powers are one of those issues politicians suddenly become very passionate about depending on who occupies the White House. When the other party's president wants military authority, Congress discovers the Constitution. When their own party's president wants military authority, Congress suddenly develops a severe allergy to reading the Constitution. Yet this time enough senators decided they were willing to push back anyway. Let's be honest, nobody runs for office promising to surrender power. Washington loves power. It collects power. It hoards power. It protects power. If power were a cryptocurrency, Congress would have bought it years ago. So when senators vote to reclaim authority over war decisions, They're not just debating Iran. They're reminding the White House that Congress still exists. The larger story may be what this says about Trump's grip on Capitol Hill. A few years ago, a vote like this would have been almost unthinkable. Republicans would have been terrified of crossing Trump. Today, some clearly aren't. That doesn't mean Trump's influence is gone. Far from it. But it does mean the automatic obedience isn't quite as automatic as it once was. That's what has Washington paying attention. Politicians watch power the way meteorologists watch hurricanes. They study where it's moving. They study whether it's growing or weakening. And this vote has a lot of people wondering whether the political winds are starting to shift. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough to notice. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans are probably looking at this story and wondering why Congress always seems capable of finding its backbone only when missiles are involved. Housing? Gridlock. Healthcare? Gridlock. Affordability? Gridlock. But mention military action, suddenly lawmakers rediscover their constitutional responsibilities like somebody found an old instruction manual in a desk drawer. The real takeaway is simple. The Senate just delivered Donald Trump a rare rebuke, and it came from members of both parties. The Iran vote matters. But the bigger question is what comes next, because once lawmakers get comfortable telling a president no, they sometimes discover it's easier than they thought. And that's the possibility that has people in Washington paying very close attention to. And finally, Tucker Carlson says he's done with the Republican Party, and the reason matters more than the headline. Now, Tucker Carlson is one of America's best-known conservative political commentators and a longtime influential voice within the Republican movement. He's not leaving Republicans because he suddenly became a Democrat. He's leaving because he says Donald Trump and the Republican Party abandoned the very thing they promised voters: America first. Carlson says Trump crossed the line when he took America into war with Iran. And he argues the party is putting foreign interests, donors, and politics ahead of the American people. Now stop for a second. Appreciate the irony. Donald Trump didn't just campaign on America first. Trump trademarked it politically. It became the slogan, the movement, the identity, the sales pitch, the bumper sticker, the hat, the rally cry. Now, one of the biggest conservative voices in America is essentially saying, America first? Apparently, there was an asterisk at the bottom of the page. That's not Democrats talking. That's Tucker Carlson saying the movement stopped being the movement. That's a much bigger problem than another cable news feud. Democrats criticizing Donald Trump is Tuesday. Tucker Carlson accusing Donald Trump of betraying the movement that made him president is something entirely different. That's like the lead singer walking off stage in the middle of the concert and announcing the band forgot the lyrics to its biggest hit. Tucker Carlson spent years defending Republicans, defending Donald Trump, convincing millions of conservatives that this movement was different from the old Republican Party. Then the Iran war happens, and suddenly Carlson is saying, I was wrong. That's not a small admission. That's a political earthquake, listeners. Imagine the guy who sold everybody tickets to the cruise ship suddenly yelling, by the way, I think we hit an iceberg. And if you're Donald Trump, this isn't just about Tucker Carlson. It's about permission. Carlson is giving disappointed conservatives permission to say out loud what they've been thinking privately. That's how political coalitions begin to crack. Not because everybody leaves at once, because one influential voice says, I'm out. And thousands of people quietly start wondering if maybe they should be out too. Republicans should be worried because Carlson isn't attacking Donald Trump from the left. He's attacking Donald Trump from inside the House. Carlson is arguing that the Republican Party has become exactly what it used to condemn: more foreign intervention, more broken promises, more politics as usual. Whether you agree with Carlson or not is almost beside the point. Millions of conservatives listen to him. And when somebody with that kind of audience starts calling the party treasonous and says he's done after more than 3 decades of support, politicians notice. The larger question isn't whether Tucker Carlson leaves the Republican Party. The larger question is whether he leaves alone. Donald Trump built a movement around the promise that America would come first. Tucker Carlson is now telling Trump's own supporters that promise has been broken. If enough Republicans decide Carlson is right, then the biggest threat to Donald Trump in the midterms won't be Democrats. It'll be Republicans who no longer believe the movement is what it claims to be. That's my insight today into a world gone mad. If you've enjoyed the podcast, found it informative, maybe got a laugh or two, please contribute to keeping this podcast around. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is a world gone mad. I'll be back Friday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolf Pack, remain skeptical, question everything. Please don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.